I want to talk about trust and trust in the work that we all do. And I thought the best way to start this would be to talk a little bit about my own journey and Charity Navigator's journey into trust. So you heard a little bit about my background. I started out as a musician, actually ran a nonprofit for the first 10 years in my professional life, then moved over to Microsoft, then came to Charity Navigator. And when I got to Charity Navigator, there was this impression that I was a tech guy, I was a for-profit guy, I didn't know anything. That hurt, but that was the way it was at the beginning. And I also came into an organization that in and of itself had been founded as a result of a breach of trust. So for those of you who don't know the history of Charity Navigator, I'll give you a real quick one. 25, maybe 30 years ago, Pat Dugan came into a significant amount of wealth. He started giving back. He started putting money into the nonprofit sector. And he made one donation, a significant donation to a fraudulent organization that actually ended up using the funds to build a vacation home in the Caribbean. This upset Pat, who was an entrepreneur, said, "Where is the morning star of the nonprofit sector?" Found that there wasn't one. He created it. If you talk, Pat's turning 90 in about a week. He's still around. He's still, if you talk to him now, the best thing he ever did in his life was Charity Navigator. When we started, we were looking only at the concept of good stewardship of donor dollars. We were looking at financial ratings, and we took something that was the status quo at the time, which was overhead, and we mainstreamed it. And for better or for worse, that became the metric that a lot of individual donors really cared about. Fast forward 15 years or 10 years ago for me, I joined Charity Navigator with the idea that I'm going to be able to help people actually get to impact and evaluate impact at scale. I also wanted to bring technology to what we were doing. The organization itself, when I got there, was broken. The former CEO had left rather abruptly. And so at the beginning of my journey was all about building trust with my staff, building trust with the board, and shifting from collecting data through publicly available means, which at the time was just the IRS Form 990 and the public website of nonprofits, to actually getting the data directly from the nonprofit so that we could tell a better story. Within a month of joining Charity Navigator, I got a very short and terse letter from one of the fundraising associations saying, "What's your plan? How are you going to address the harms that you've done to the sector with Charity Navigator?" I'm 1 month enrolled. I was like, I have no clue, but can we speak? And we had a conversation that actually showed me that we had a very broken relationship and there was no trust between Charity Navigator and the sector that we were trying to evaluate. And that led to, within a year, I ended up speaking. They did at their annual event, they did a fireside chat where people basically got to throw rocks at me and tell me all the things that we had done wrong. It was one of the most powerful moments for me to understand, wow, we have a really broken trust relationship here. And we're never going to get to scaling impact or any kind of impact assessment through brute force and just forcing people to give us the data that we needed. Long story short, it took 5 years before we actually got to a place where we were able to collect data. It also took us that long to sort of build out the systems, build the teams, build a board that was actually going to be supportive, build a board that was actually representative. And now we're in a place where when we evolve the ratings, we're doing that with nonprofits. We have a council of nonprofit leaders. This is a 2-year engagement that we get C-suite from a wide variety of different nonprofits to actually help us formulate where the rating is going to go, how it's going to evolve, as well as we have an expert group that's actually working on the ratings methodology. So all of this was part of this journey towards building trust. This is now I think we're in a much better place. Again, just give you sort of where we started. We were rating about 8,000 organizations on financials and governance. Now we're rating 245,000 organizations still on financials and governance, but we're looking at impact, we're looking at leadership, we're looking at feedback practices, and a series of other things which I'll talk about as we get going. So that only was able to happen with building trust with the sector. And at the same time, I think it's worth noting, we had to do this without losing trust from the donor audience that had become fixated on a very simple metric. And so right now we're still roughly at about 10 million unique visitors coming to our site every year that are using us to find you and do an assessment and then make choices about their giving. So that's kind of the backdrop. What I want to go through now is to have a lot of data on sort of where is trust right now and how is trust evolving in the sector that we all live and work in right now. And I think I don't know the breadth of the audience, but my comments are very much US centric. So I'm not looking at a broader landscape. So trust in charitable organizations is still relatively high. We're at about 57%. But the thing that's troubling right now is that there's more and more distrust. And if you've been paying attention over the last 9 months, the world has really changed, right? And so that 43% is growing and it's getting louder. And I think that's something that we have to find ways to pay attention to. We're getting more and more open attacks and unsubstantiated attacks. What Elon Musk is going after here is what is a 100-year-old system of social services being provided by nonprofits and paid for by the government. Yesterday, there was a report that came out from the Urban Institute talking about the effects of what's happened in the last 9 months with regard to the cuts that are happening. 28% of nonprofits receive some form of government funding. 1 in 3 nonprofits have had to either reduce programs or let people go. So we're in a state right now where these comments and the actual reality of the funding cuts are changing our world. For those of us who are not government funded, so Charity Navigator is definitely not government funded, we're feeling a ripple effect. We also keep having bad things happen. This is a headline from September 27th, $45 million, not going to where it was intended. And again, this just adds fuel to the fire of what we're seeing from how we manage trust in the sector. Across the political divide right now, we very definitely have greater favorability and greater perception of trust within the liberal left, less so on the conservative right. I don't know how your organizations are set up, but one of the things that Charity Navigator has really strived to maintain is a neutral footprint so that we are actually not seen as biased to one particular political party or the other. We've also been very clear to not pick sides, or we don't evaluate based on mission. So we're a mission agnostic. And I think that's just know that within the context. I realize each and every organization is coming at things from a very specific way. So this may or may not be possible for you. Nonprofits are still seen as more effective than many other organizations, and we've got to hold on to that. We're definitely doing better than philanthropy. And I think philanthropy today is challenged and is going to continue to be challenged. One of the things to think about with regard to the money that's going into the sector, it's coming from less and less people. So today, I believe the number is 13% of the donors make up about 85% of the dollars going into the sector. That means we're not being representative of the people. And this, from a Charity Navigator perspective, our core audience is the individual small dollar donors. And so this is hurting us, and we're also looking for ways of how do we increase opportunities for everyday donors to get back in the game, so to speak. This is, again, I don't know if this is not a new stat, but it's not changing. We're having a continuous decline in the number of U.S. households that are actually participating in gifts to the nonprofit sector. I think it's important to realize that this is looking at sort of donations to 501c3s specifically. There are other forms of giving, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Volunteering took a hit during COVID and has not fully rebounded. And I think that's an area where I don't know to how much you've been talking about actual engagement, but when you're trying to build civic engagement, one of the things that we've observed is volunteers tend to be more resilient and more, sorry, losing my words, but they you end up with recurrence through volunteering. And so the fact that we're seeing a decline in volunteering opportunities, and even the organizations and the intermediaries that have been handling volunteering are struggling right now. This data point comes specifically from Charity Navigator's Giving Basket. So one of the things that we launched back in 2015 was the ability for donors to give directly through our platform. There's roughly $40 to $50 million a year that goes through the Giving Basket to individual nonprofits. Again, it's small dollar donations going to roughly, it's between 20 and 30,000 nonprofits that get money through our platform. Unfortunately, this is very national in its focus and not necessarily hitting the local communities. And so one of the things that we're looking at in our own evolution as we go forward is how does Charity Navigator get better at going local? And to the extent that's relevant to all of you, know that right now we're more of a nationally focused organization with and at least that's where the dollars are going. So I was at GoFundMe's event. I saw some people in the room earlier who were there in May in Chicago. This number that you see on the slide is actually, it's now $44 billion. They're 15 years old, and they've moved $44 billion to the sector and to individuals that are in need. GoFundMe is a really interesting third-party intermediary that if you're not set up on GoFundMe right now, do it. They've got the ability to set up a nonprofit profile page. You can pull in a bunch of information about the work that you do. Charity Navigator, last month, we launched the ability to start a GoFundMe at the back end of one of the Giving Basket transactions. So we're seeing a lot more going into the crowdfunding space. GoFundMe is also incredibly effective in how they sort of maintain connectivity with the donor, whether it's to an individual or a nonprofit. And so this is another platform where I think they're getting recognition, and they are also growing in a way that many of us are not. Giving through intermediaries, again, these are charts looking at giving circles, the growth of giving circles, the growth of giving through Benevity or through workplace giving programs, and also the growth in donor advised funds. Charity Navigator is also a charity itself, and we've seen a huge number of donor advised fund donations. The other interesting artifact with the donor advised funds is one of our new favorite donors is anonymous. This is both good and bad, but we had over $500,000 in anonymous donations, all coming from DAFs. Yeah. Tomorrow is DAF Day. I hope you're all doing something for DAF Day. There's getting more and more growth in this, and it's a really convenient way for donors that have financial assets to transfer them and get them into the sector. Looking a little bit at how we all rate within the world of trust. This is a chart. I hope you're familiar with everyone here. Charity Navigator, Candid, the Greater Giving Alliance, and Charity Watch. Just some stats on who's doing what, who actually does a rating on Beyond Financials, who doesn't do a rating, but is just information. This is really sort of super high level. But the thing I want to say about this slide is, as you're thinking about raising your profile with donors, you want to be able to point to third-party accreditation. And it's relatively straightforward to get a complete rating on Charity Navigator, to get a complete profile with GuideStar or Candid. It's a little bit more work with give.org, but it's totally attainable and worth looking at if it's beneficial to the audience that you're serving. Now, there's high trust in the third-party evaluators. So in a scale of 0 to 5, we're all just at about 4, a little bit over 4. So we're still trusted. And I think the most important part when you're looking at this from a fundraising perspective, it matters. A platinum seal with Candid has a 62% higher chance of actually getting funded. We've seen a 9x in terms of giving to a 4-star charity as compared to a 2-star charity. So there's more money and there's more opportunity with that. And again, getting these seals of transparency or seals of trust is attainable. The other sort of data point is if you're hovering at between a 3 and a 4-star, get to 4 stars, because literally it can be almost 20% increase in donor dollars coming to you through that increase in the rating. So the dark side of this is, even though the third-party evaluators actually help, there's not enough awareness. And so one of the things is, if you've got the high marks, make sure people see it, because not everybody knows that we're out there. And I appreciated the introduction saying we're the largest, most utilized nonprofit evaluator out there. It's still only about 17% of the donors that actually know about us. And so I think that's also something where we're working on how we get more broadly available and out there to the world. This is nothing new, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there's a lot coming at the sector and different parts of the sector, and how we actually tell our story and validate our story with proof points is absolutely vital right now. Talked about this earlier with the report from Urban Institute, but this is having an effect on the workforce, significant effect for, again, I don't know exactly who's in the room and how many of you have government funding, but there's a ripple effect. And I'll give you an example in terms of there's need for work within the nonprofits. We've just posted a new job position for a communications and PR manager. We got over 400 resumes within a week of posting that job. There's real need right now. So let's talk about how we can use some of the tools that we offer to actually build trust. Now pause for a second here, and to everyone in the room, do you know your rating? You do. Do you know the changes that we've made to the system? Because I think a lot of times when I've spoken to audiences, people are like, oh, I didn't know we were rated. So you can be rated passively on just the 990 information, but it's the other information that I want to speak to that's super important. And so there are 4 parts of the rating right now. The backbone of it is still coming from the 990, and that's what we're calling accountability in finance. It's pulling in basic financial information and basic governance information. Don't skimp on the governance information. It's super important. We want to know you have an independent board of directors. We want to know how many board of directors you have. This is important to donors, and it's important to the good governance of an organization. We look at leadership and adaptability, which is pretty straightforward. Just what's your plan? What are your strategies to achieve that plan? We also look at feedback practices. So we worked with, there's a group called the Irritants, which is a collection of entities, Charity Navigator, Candid, Feedback Labs, and a group of others that have looked at sort of distilling out what are the best feedback practices that organizations should have. And so it's a bit meta in how we look at it. Sort of, do you have a practice? How are you using that practice to adapt program delivery? What have you learned? Have you learned things from it? And are you using those learnings in what you're doing? And so that is something, and you can submit that directly through the nonprofit portal. We'll get to that in a second. And then last and most important, we're looking at impact and measurement. And the way we got to impact and measurement was first through the acquisition of a small nonprofit called Impact Matters that was looking at a cost per outcome assessment of nonprofits in direct service interventions. We have about 25 service areas where you're able to actually do that cost per outcome assessment. And that's which has gotten to us about 2,000 impact assessments. The other part of the impact and measurement piece is the organization's capacity for measuring impact. And that's looking at your ability to actually self-assess and adapt and deliver better through learnings that you have in your own processes. What is important in the way the ratings go, again, you can get a 4-star rating with just the financials, or you can get a 4-star rating with a complete set of information that you've supplied to Charity Navigator. It's important to note one of the aspects of our site, and I mentioned the giving basket before, one way that we help donors find what they're looking for to create curated lists. We do this in times of crisis, but we also do it as best of breed within specific cause areas. And to get onto one of our lists, we need a complete rating. So we're looking for 3 and 4 stars, but we're also looking for at least 3 of the beacons to be completed in that. It's a way of actually elevating your profile. The other thing to note, if you have a complete rating, you will score higher in a search query because we have more information to guide the donors towards. Finally, how do you get there? Well, you create, if you haven't done this, set up an account in the nonprofit portal. You can actually do this directly from the ratings page, or you can do it from the home page where it says nonprofit resources. Go in there, set yourself up, or whoever is the appropriate person within your organization. Download the toolkit, update your ratings information. It'll also have links to other organizations if you need to submit data there. We are still using the 990 supplied to us by the IRS as that basic information. So sometimes if you're missing information or you've misfiled information on the 990, that can create a delay in the updates. We do update ratings every 2 months. The last ratings update actually happened on October 5th, so just this week. And I'll speak to you, you'll see the stats on that when I get to it. But this is yours to claim and do something with. It's also yours to take the seals or the ratings badges and use that in your own promotional material. So this is an example. In other words, if you are a 4-star organization, use that 4-star in your promotional materials. Let the donors know that you've been validated. Point them to our site. And that's so for having that sort of neutral third-party evaluation, that can be incredibly helpful. Do the same for all the other intermediaries. In other words, that's what we're here for, is to really help the donors sort of differentiate between what they're seeing. This is, again, just sharing that, if you've got these ratings actually have an impact on donor behaviors, and so you can use them to your advantage. The last thing I want to say on this is that, when I started by talking about sort of the overhead myth and all of that, it's taken us a while to get to a place where we're actually articulating impact. And I think this is in every one of our hand to actually shape what's the difference we've made. How are we actually changing the dial? Because donors ultimately want to pay for something that is resulting in a change. And if you can articulate the change, you can do it through the ratings information is going to help, but that's also your storytelling. This is a bit of a preview for something that we're working on right now. We'll be announcing it later this fall, but it'll only sort of come into effect in the beginning of next calendar year. We have a new way that we're actually collecting information that will allow us to create an impact score for just about any organization. Today, we're limited to direct services organizations with the cost per outcome assessment that we're doing. We have a new way we're approaching this. Announcements will be coming soon on that. One of the things we're trying not to do is be overly distracting in the last quarter of the calendar year as we go into the giving season. So nothing you need to worry about now, but just know that that is going to be something that will be available to all of you. Finally, this is sort of stats on where we are and the impact we've made in terms of evolving the ratings. We're at a place now where we've got over 5,000 organizations with 4 beacons. If you go back to where I started, we were rating 8,000 organizations with only publicly available information. We now have 240 plus thousand with that same basic information. with a much lower focus on the actual financials. But we're at 5,000 already where we have a complete score. And so that's the growth that we're seeing. And there's been tremendous growth in the last 6 months based on some of the changes that we're seeing in the world around us. People want to tell their story, and they want entities like Charity Navigator and Candid and others. Candid's also seeing growth. They need that validation that their work is not only good, but it's valid. So really, in closing, we're here we're trying to help you tell your story. We're hopeful, and again, this is something where I'm eager for feedback, and I think we've got plenty of time for Q&A. The ratings, to get the ratings right, they have to be useful to the donor, but they have to be useful to you. And so that's why we've been designing them in a way that is taking in the voice of the sector. And feedback loops are really important to us. And so we will be periodically asking you for your input. Tell us. If you don't like it, tell me. I am very open to that. And it's the only way. We got to where we were because we've had these conversations and we've had the hard feedback. That has allowed us to grow. It has had negative consequences in some areas. So we've lost some of our significant donors because all they wanted was feedback, and they wanted to know what the CEO's salary was, and we refused to put that in our ratings. So I think there's a give and take, and we're very much consumer focused and really trying to make what we do attractive to everyday donors. But we're also trying to make it be the best possible thing for all of you and for what we believe is truth, is what is good in the sector. So with that, thank you, and really just open to questions at this point.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering if you see yourself as part of the effective altruism movement or something kind of separate.
I love the question because EAG is happening in New York City this weekend, and I will be there. We are not an effective altruist organization, but we are often, I like to think of us as potentially an on-ramp to that. So for someone who, we're often the first point of discovery for someone that's looking for a more effective organization to support. One key difference between ourselves and the EA crowd is that, I said this before, we're mission agnostic. So you have interventions that are more or less effective at solving a specific problem. Take something like homelessness. We will rate any organization working on homelessness, but the effective interventions where we bring in an element of EA is the list that we have on homelessness are going to be more interventions that are actually known to be effective in reducing homelessness, not just providing aid to homeless people. So I hope that answers it, but we're highly influenced, but not an EA organization.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for the talk. I'm Brian Doherty from Sane Humane Society. You and I spoke a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I believe I'm the person you referenced at the beginning of this presentation. So you invited critical feedback. I will provide it.
Please.
And I already have provided it directly to you, but I'll provide it here for everybody. I think what you're trying to accomplish is laudable. I don't think it's working. And we can talk more about this because we don't need to get into it with everything. But I do think that the ratings absolutely create a lack of trust in a bunch of really good organizations who are doing really good work because they don't hit some metrics that you all have established. We've discussed this. We talked about the changes in metrics that you all had. For Sane Humane Society, we're 100% charity at this point. We've got all the beacons, but even you just went over it, the lack of folks that have the beacons, the lack of consistency that takes place on folks that get 4 stars, I think is a fundamental challenge and shouldn't exist in the process. But aside from that, since that point in time, you've went and created these causeway funds, which is really what draws my ire. Where Charity Navigator is collecting money and now distributing that money to groups in different sectors that Charity Navigator has determined are the ones that should get that is just something that I fundamentally don't understand. So let me just focus on the Causeway funds for now. And can you just talk to me about that process and tell me how that came about?
Sure. And kind of want to touch on, I'll speak to Causeway funds. It was something in what you said before that I wanted to address, but I've already lost it. The Causeway funds, so this was, in 2023, we acquired a small startup organization called Causeway. The goal of Causeway was to create something similar to mutual funds. And what that was meant to do was say you care about reducing homelessness, you care about global poverty, you care about global health. We would have a fund of organizations. At this right now, the way we're doing the funds is about a dozen nonprofits that are approaching the issue from a different mix of perspectives. So whether it's direct service, policy change, awareness building, and that's looking at sort of addressing the issue. I have a fund manager we have a dedicated fund manager who has been working on the funds. That's their full-time job. I think there are 9 funds right now. And the goal there was to simplify the donor journey to find just the cause. And the reason, the methodology and why this organization even came into being was it was 2 young guys that were looking at donor fatigue or brand fatigue within the younger donor communities and a desire to focus on causes. So that's the origin of Causeway. We launched it a year ago, and it's had limited traction because one of the issues with Charity Navigator as a platform that's 25 years old is we're a lookup site. So people aren't necessarily coming to us for a fund. They're looking for Humane Society. They're looking for the American Red Cross, and they have a name in mind and they want to validate it. So 80% of our traffic is validation. So that's the origin and the genesis of Causeway. It's had, as I said, it's had limited success, but it's there. And we're investing in it and seeing what we can do with it. To your point about the disparity, or let's say the difference between a 4-star charity with 1 beacon versus a 4-star charity with 4 beacons, that was a mistake we made. We launched the Encompass rating system, which is what you're looking at, after hearing for decades, stop rating us on only financials. We want to be rated on impact. We created a system. We wanted to have a do no harm approach to how we brought the system online. So we said, hey, we're going to get your data. Once we have 3 990s that have been e-filed, we're going to be able to create a rating. But we need you to give us the additional information. We didn't take points away for incompleteness. And that's been a huge problem for us because that's how you have that sort of huge disparity. And you have highly rated organizations with limited information. And this is something we're working on it. We're going to have to pull back, but go back to the kind of 2 factors in play right now. The world around us is not positive towards the sector. If we were to suddenly say we're moving to a completeness metric, we would end up stripping many organizations of their ratings, which I think would be pretty detrimental to the sector right now at a time where the sector's under fire. So how we bring that in, it's going to be a multi-year process. It is going to be really pushing and asking people, you got to give us your data, and making it harder and harder to get a top rating without a complete rating. So it's in process, but it's, again, that was my call, and I regret that call 5 years ago. Right? Yeah. By the column.
Hi there. My name's Chris from Charity Water. You mentioned that you were developing a metric or a score for how nonprofits prove their impact. I'm just wondering if there will be any independent and transparent review or oversight of that methodology.
Absolutely. So first of all, everything that we do it's free and open source. So all of our methodologies are public and they're on our website. And the evolution and how we've actually even built that, like what we're working on, was built with our Council of Nonprofit Leaders and our expert group, which is all made up of nonprofit professionals. Charity Water's been a great organization that's helped push us into bringing certain things online over the years. So I've developed a lot of respect for the rigor that you bring to what you do, but also the rigor with which you hold us accountable. So thank you for that.
Hi, Michael. Francesco De Flavis from the National MS Society. Question. Yesterday, we had a great panel about from CFOs about financials and the like. And one of the things that came is out of that is the need for organizations to have good reserves, especially now that we have seen the devastating impact of losing government grants, for example. So the question is how having very large reserves can negatively impact the rating, or maybe not. And are you thinking already trying to include the criteria of diversification in terms of revenue sources for nonprofit in your ratings?
I love the question, and I think you're also prompting me to say one thing about we're in a period of uncertainty. If you were government funded and you suddenly have 30% less resources, that's going to affect your financials in a pretty real way. We went through a period of great uncertainty with COVID, and COVID was similar to what's happening now. It doesn't affect us all equally. It didn't affect us all equally. We're determined to not, first of all, just how the ratings are going to look at how the effects of the funding cuts this year will play into the ratings. And so we're going to adjust. We don't know how we're going to adjust yet, because the 990 is a lagging metric, and it's going to take us a year or two before we actually see that. To the first part of your question, which is around reserves, we don't cast judgment on that. There's been discussion at different points of, should we evaluate reserves or people that are living, organizations living off of an endowment. I don't. So I'm speaking personally now. I'm not necessarily the programs team, but I don't see that as a valid metric, because it's something we all need reserves. And COVID was such a great lesson of that, where if you had reserves, maybe you bridged. If you didn't, maybe you're not here anymore, right? And so I think that's good business. Having that play into the ratings, I think, could be really problematic. And again, I'm giving you my personal view on that. My team may sort of be upset with me saying that, but I don't think it's relevant, particularly given the kind of uncertainty. I mean, what's so hard about the government cuts right now is it was by far the most secure form of funding, and it just evaporated. So nobody really saw it coming. I think some saw it might be coming, but it hit so hard and so fast. So I hope that answers that. Yeah.
My name is Christoph. I represent Sound of Peace, a not-for-profit, not headquartered in this country, but your presentation was very, very helpful nevertheless. I'm wondering if you could talk to what drives the algorithm you utilize to establish these ratings, and in particular, the weighting of the different factors that you mentioned. Is that ultimately a judgment call by your organization? Is it reflective of donor preferences? Is it reflective of best practice in the industry? If you could maybe shed some light on that.
Sure. One of the things that's actually in our favor is that we have lots of data. And so the answer is a little bit of all, right? In the sense that we're looking at, if we don't know, we look at what's the most common behavior, right? So particularly with financials, that's easy. And we always did this. I don't think the sector necessarily knew this, but our financial ratings, we did not treat, let's say, financials for a museum the same way as we treated financials for a food bank. they're categorically different. And so you group them. And so there is some grouping based on cause or intervention. Then there's best practices that come into it. There's academic literature that comes into it, particularly when you're getting into impact. You're also having to either calculate or fabricate a hypothetical counterfactual. So there's a lot there. And it's all, again, this is all on the website. It's a long discussion, but we've been painfully obvious with everything that we do to make sure that it was transparent, because we're asking all of you to be transparent. We have to be transparent. One of the, I know you talked about AI yesterday. One of the challenges we're having right now is we're being disintermediated by the AI. And so you get what you need from ChatGPT or Gemini, and you don't need us. The problem is if you don't come to our site, I can't fundraise. So we're having a little bit of an existential crisis around AI as well, because one of our founding principles was always have a public data, public information, and the methodologies. The other two were never charge the donor and never charge the charity. But so I'm happy to talk further offline, but I think it's too much for Q&A. Okay, one more. Yeah, for sure.
What?
So, good.
Based on the criteria that you have, what would be Charity Navigator's score? And what are some areas that you would focus on?
Yes. So, and thank you for the question. And sort of let me go back to my beginning. When I joined Charity Navigator, we didn't rate ourselves. And I was like, why don't we rate ourselves? Well, we don't qualify. I was like, give me a break, right? We have to. We are a 4-star charity. So we do rate ourselves. We have rated ourselves now for about 7 years. We also have the BBB-Wise Giving Alliance Seal of Transparency. We pay for it, and we do that every 2 years. And we are Platinum Seal with Candid. And and happy to dig into that. There are areas where I think we don't always, our financials aren't always great, or let's say they could be better, but we're still a 4-star charity. And the thing about the ratings, and this is, you could say, well, you're gaming it. Well, the ratings are equally applied. So we're not, we don't special treat anybody in the ratings. And so I feel pretty good about the integrity of what we've got. And it's all there on go to our ratings page, right? So literally like the way someone would look up another charity and take a look, you can see the different numbers. Thank you for that question, because it's important. Okay.